the sunshine, far from the sky. Just find the sunshine in your own life. You're a lollipop, no second prize.
Hello everybody, so I'm going to do a Renee rants and reveals and discusses little video today. It won't be little, I'm sure I'll ramble on a great deal, so that's nonsense. This is kind of a continuation on from my Ruby Sparks film review, which hardly anyone has watched, but if you want to watch it, I will link that video in the doobly-doo in my pants. I said that I'd follow it up with a wider discussion on the MANIC PIXIE DREAM GIRL trope. So let's get cracking, shall we? I'm going to attempt to include examples of this trope from both film and literature so that it can link back to books. It tends to be that there are more readily available and easier to locate examples, at least from my experience within film, of the MANIC PIXIE DREAM GIRL trope within film. I'm going to only try and cite examples that I am familiar with so that I don't incorrectly present things or anything. The MANIC PIXIE DREAM GIRL as a trope, as a name, was cited in 2005 as a response went to Kirsten Dunst's character in Elizabethtown, which is a film I've seen. That bubbly, shallow, cinematic creature who exists solely in the fevered imaginations of sensitive writer-directors to teach broodingly soulful young men to embrace life and its infinite mysteries and adventures. And of course that was applicable to Elizabethtown. You can't deny that is a film written and directed by Cameron Crowe, who also wrote and directed Almost Famous, which also had the character of Penny Lane, who was played by Kate Hudson. And also all of the girls really in the Band-Aids gang could be cited as MANIC PIXIE DREAM GIRLs, but it seems to be a Cameron Crowe thing to do. In Elizabethtown, Kirsten Dunst's character really does inspire Orlando Bloom's character to get out of his depression, because he was suicidal at the time that they met, and she inspires him to live life and she encourages him to go on that road trip he goes on and all such jazz. So that's that one. The definition I prefer for the MANIC PIXIE DREAM GIRL comes from TV Tropes, best site ever. This is their definition, which I prefer. The MANIC PIXIE DREAM GIRL is there to give new meaning to the male hero's life. She's stunningly attractive, high on life, full of wacky quirks and idiosyncrasies, and often has a touch of wild hair dye. She's inexplicably obsessed with the hero, on whom she will focus all of her antics until he learns to live freely and love wildly. Probably conjuring up some images in your head from films you have seen. I don't really have a problem with the MANIC PIXIE DREAM GIRL trope, provided when it is used, it is able to expand and go beyond its limitations and beyond its set prerogatives and set elements. When you have a character who may adhere to a lot of these traits, but is able to become something else outside of that, then I'm totally fine with it. I'm totally down with that. Just for me as a viewer, the superficial problem that I have with this trope is that often it is simply predictable and a bit boring, because it's repetitive and you can note the same pattern in this type of character in lots of different films. So it's not breaking new ground and going anywhere different. On other levels, the reason that this trope can annoy me as a viewer, it can be quite sexist, because often these women are taken from the viewpoint of the male protagonist. So you aren't getting a quote-unquote true representation of them as a human being. You're seeing their personality and their lifestyle and such through the eyes of the male character who's enamored with them. So when the films and the books acknowledge that this is the case and that the presentation you're getting of this female is skewered and not entirely objective, then that's okay. I can handle that a little. But so often you are simply getting what is on the surface level is all you're going to get in a lot of these films and a lot of these books. So that's when I tend to take issue, just in terms of, as you know, a viewer, in terms of the narrative structure of this piece and whatnot. It's not exploring very much of the character. You're just getting to know their quirky, wacky traits, and the music they like, and the wacky things they wear, and do they rollerblade or hop on their scooter and ride around, and do crazy antics, and is there a montage, are there balloons involved, and all that sort of thing. You're not getting to know them, you're just seeing what they're doing aesthetically, and you're seeing the way in which they're changing the life of the male protagonist, so you're getting to see enough of him in depth, and often he's quite boring. But you don't get to know this character. She has to remain elusive and a bit ambiguous and a bit untouchable because she is ethereal like. Often she serves as a kind of muse. I've got no problems with the notion of a muse, and that's a classic idea and classic trope from ancient times. But it's the notion of, because this woman is meant to be often a dual protagonist, or at least someone of equal interest as the male lead, they have to be able to play alongside one another, and yet the balance is never evened out a lot of the time. You have much more dramatic weight being given to the guy, and not nearly as much being given to this girl who's meant to simply be there as a tool, as something that functions for the motivation and the inspiration and whatnot for the male character. She's not given her own weight and her own depth. Why would any woman want to be reduced to a two-dimensional fixture of the male imagination? Haven't we moved past this as a society? You're seeing this type of female being presented from the mind, the creative mind of an older male who is looking back on it almost with the sense of nostalgia and yearning and such. And it's fine to have characters on your screen and in the books you read who are serving as, you know, a lustful object, provided they can be more. To illuminate the definitions I've provided you with, I should give examples that I know and recognise from various films and books I've read of Manic Pixie Dream Girl types. Amelie from Amelie. Kirsten Dunst's character from Elizabethtown, Penny Lane and all of the Band-Aids from Almost Famous. Natalie Portman's character from Garden State is a mega example of this trope. Emily Blunt's character from The Adjustment Bureau to an extent. A lot of Amy Adams' characters, you could argue that Giselle in Enchanted is a Manic Pixie Dream Girl. Maggie Gyllenhaal's character in Stranger Than Fiction, Kate Winslet's character in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Zooey Deschanel's character in 500 Days of Summer, the romantic lead in the indie film Submarine, Audrey Hepburn's Holly Golightly in Breakfast at Tiffany's, Maria Von Trapp in The Sound of Music. Think about it. Even Kate Winslet's character in the dark crime film Heavenly Creatures could be labelled as a Manic Pixie Dream Girl. What's notable about a lot of these films is that, yes, they adhere to this trope, but admirably a lot of them try to subvert it in their own way and expand upon it and critique it to a certain extent. The movie Ruby Sparks, even though I had issues with it for sure, it tried to give some commentary on this particular trope in terms of how men view women and their ideal woman and such, and they kind of, you know, Zoe Kazan inserted it into the exploration of the Pygmalion myth and creator creation kind of thing. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, even though it always makes the list for the Manic Pixie Dream Girl, I think it's notable to remember that Kate Winslet's character actually outwardly says to Joel, to Jim Carrey's character at one point, she actually says to him, "Too many guys think I'm a concept, or I complete them, or I'm going to make them alive. But I'm just a fucked up girl who's looking for my own peace of mind. Don't assign me yours." So, because Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind is one of my favourite films, so I'm certainly not going to be bashing it about. You get to see Clementine as much more than just the crazy girl who's really free-spirited and free-thinking and open-minded and a little bit nuts who, you know, swerves into Jim Carrey's character's life and turns it upside down and such. You get to know her as much more than just that, and you get to see their relationship explored in a much more varied and dynamic fashion. You could even argue that in 500 Days of Summer, the character of Summer, even though I don't like her, is ultimately portrayed as being more than just what Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character wanted her to be. The ending of that film is quite pointed in that it subverts, a happy ending idea, and it is made to examine, for his character to examine the way in which he built up the idea of Summer in his head, as opposed to actually getting to know her and accepting her for who she actually was, and realizing that their relationship probably wasn't going to work. He was in love with the idea of being in love, and being in love with the idea of Summer that he had created in his mind. I think that Stranger Than Fiction, because again it's another one of my favourite movies, I think there's a lot more to Maggie Gyllenhaal's character. It's fair to argue that she in fact does not really inspire Will Ferrell to do all that much. She's just comes into his life and is there as a kind of support mechanism for him, while having her own life on the side and still doing everything she was already doing. She's independent of him, which I think is nice in that movie. She already had her bakery, she already had all her high concepts about politics and whatnot. She already had everything going on. And in fact, Will Ferrell entered her life as opposed to the opposite, so that's kind of a subversion there, which I really liked. Amelie, she is the Manic Pixie Dream Girl. Audrey Tautou often plays that kind of role, but because I'm such a fan of that movie, I'm not going to sit around and diss it too much. Holly Golightly, Audrey Hepburn's portrayal of that in Breakfast at Tiffany's, always makes these lists, and it's funny because, of course, I'm sure if Truman Capote was around, he'd be yelling about that, because his Holly Golightly certainly I don't think was intended, the way he wrote it in the novel was not intended to be that way, so it's very much Audrey's portrayal of the character in the film. But you do get to see an examination, slight examination of her more as a damaged person who's got issues, and you see that towards the end of the movie in particular. The character, for example, in the movie Submarine, is very subdued and very cool and calm and sassy in her own way, and equally elusive and equally this object of desire for the young boy, but she's not manic and running about and John Green has often been criticised for writing an awful lot of Manic Pixie Dream Girls. Alaska, in Looking for Alaska, I've been informed, is a very, very notable personification of this trope. I believe that Margot in Paper Towns is at first an examination of this trope, and then she is subverted and you find out that things are in fact quite different. To a certain extent, I've seen it argued that Hazel in The Fault in Our Stars could also be a Manic Pixie Dream Girl. Vianne in Chocolat, in Joanne Harris's novel Chocolat, could be a Manic Pixie Dream woman, indeed. Of course, you do get to know more about her past and such things, but certainly in terms of when she first enters the novel and the town, she's evoking change in everyone, and it's through chocolate. What's more quirky than someone who's opening a chocolate shop and turning everyone's lives around with her wacky ways. My beloved Anne Shirley, labelled as a very classic example of a Manic Pixie Dream Girl, and certainly when she's younger, in the very beginning of the first book in particular, I think that that's actually a fair equation. Of course there's so much more to Anne Shirley, but she's certainly coming into Avonlea, into Marilla and Matthew's life, and turning everything upside down with her really different world views and her literary quotations and her optimistic outlook on life and all that kind of thing. So I'm certainly going to admit to that. I think that Anne can fit into the trope for sure. Dharma and Greg, that is Dharma's point, even to a certain extent, because she's playing off of Greg's very straight guy type. Phoebe in Friends, yes, there's a lot more to Phoebe, and she's like the comic character and the comic relief a lot of the time, but she is certainly quirky and an individual and very much her own person who breezes in and out of people's lives a lot of the time. Although it's, argued she has a permanent influence and standing within the community of her friends. Chuck in Pushing Daisies, that's Anna Friel's character. To a certain extent, I think she fits that. Jess in New Girl, which is half the point of the show New Girl. I'm a big fan of New Girl. I have nothing against Zooey Deschanel. I really, really don't. And I think she really is adorable in that show. And it does play notably with her standing in that universe and what the point of her character is. There's even a really quite satisfying moment where the character of Jess is having a bit of an argument with Nick's girlfriend at the time, who's a lawyer, who is more of the sassy, really intellectual, kind of standoffish businesswoman female kind of character, and she's dissing Jess for all her quirky attributes and her really girly nature and her sing-songy ways and all that sort of thing. And she's essentially dissing all the Manic Pixie Dream Girl traits in Jess. And Jess shouts back at her that yes, these are part of her and this is what she does, but it doesn't make her any less mature and it doesn't make her any less of a person. And that was just, it's a really short moment, but I like that they had that and they addressed that, and I thought it was good for Zooey Deschanel to acknowledge that too, seeing as she has a tendency to play these types of roles. The reason I wanted to discuss this was mainly just to get your opinions on this particular trope, to get your opinions regarding some of the examples I've listed. If you know of more examples that you can cite and remember, then please do share them. It's important to note that sometimes there are some elements of the trope in characters and then others not so present. You'll find in a lot of the film examples I listed before that sometimes these girls aren't always manic. They're not always very bubbly or optimistic, but they're still there as a dream girl. And before you go thinking that I'm just very, very sexist, it is true that there have been several notable examples in film and literature of manic pixie dream guys. And some that I found on TV tropes that I was nodding along with. Sebastian, the character of Sebastian in Brideshead Revisited, both the novel and any of the film adaptations, could totally argue for that, because he's changing the way in which what's-his-face is thinking about things, and he's got his teddy bear everywhere, and that's certainly quirky. Jack in Titanic, yeah, totally. Rose is the one who's really depressed and forlorn and given up on things and is stuck in a rut and stuff, and then Jack's in her life and making her think differently for those 3 days they were together. John Hannah's character in Sliding Doors, he's the one who helps make Gwyneth Paltrow's character change things around and have a new perspective on everything, and is evoking active changes in her that her other personality isn't getting because he's not in the other personality's life. This was one I found really funny. I wonder what Leslie's going to say to this. Dickon in The Secret Garden. Totally, he's a sweetheart, I adore Dickon, but he's got his animals, he's got his crazy Yorkshire accent, and he's got his weird ways with nature, and he's like helping to evoke change in Mary's life as well, so just think. It's important to note that tropes are not necessarily a bad thing, and they all serve a purpose and you can't get away from them. They are everywhere. This is the way in which you know, our cultural mindset works and how we form creative things. It's always going to be influenced by something else, and it will always adhere to some sort of idea, some broad concept with, you know, different elements coming from every which way. And tropes exist, and the fact that they exist isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just the manner in which they are presented and perpetuated in media can have a negative impact, can create a negative message, can perpetuate negative assumptions about things. So I think it's important to acknowledge tropes, not necessarily to be disdainful of them, just to recognize them and discuss them and explore them, and hope that when they are being examined and explored within the works that we see and read and whatnot, that it's going to be done intelligently and with a mind to looking beyond the superficial nature of any particular trope. And because the Manic Pixie Dream Girl, for whatever reason, has become more and more popular over the years, especially within indie films, almost a cornerstone of an indie film a lot of the time, it's just something that I've become more aware of. I think the problem that a lot of viewers tend to have, especially female viewers when they're watching these movies, is that in the instance where these women are simply there to function as a means of change for the male and do little to nothing else, that's when you feel like you're just being objectified to a certain extent. The notion of the really pretty girl who is fun and frivolous and all these sorts of things is just there as an object that is going to somehow evoke change, and that is what she's important for, not for the person that she is. When these character types are expanded and examined and looked upon from a slightly different perspective at some point during the story, then I can get behind that more, and I'm like, yeah, that's okay, I can roll with that. A lot of people have criticised the very term Manic Pixie Dream Girl and have said that it's misogynistic, and the fact that we are making note of this trope and qualifying films often in regard to it is a demonstration of the sexist attitudes of viewers, both male and female, and it often links back to criticism of works developed by women in particular, like as writers and directors. And that's something I've never linked the presence of a Manic Pixie Dream Girl character to the people that have created it necessarily. I tend to get much more worried if it is from a male creator's perspective. That's why I was so interested to see Ruby Sparks, because I knew it was written by a young female and I wanted to see what she was going to do with that idea and where she'd take it. It's just interesting to see, and it's worthwhile discussing because it is so prevalent in a lot of the work we see. I just wanted to bring it up. Please do let me know what your thoughts are. Talk to you soon. Goodbye! Apparently men desire women who really like the shins. I don't know who the shins are. I'm not going to be anyone's Manic Pixie Dream Girl. Who are the shins?